Support for Wavemakers comes from listeners like you and the Tampa Bay Times. The Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper is available around the Tampa Bay area and online at tampabay.com. Thanks to the Tampa Bay Times for their support.
You have to fight back. Defend all your rights. And understand that if done collectively, it is more powerful than if it's done by one person. Collective, collegial ways of thinking creates a solidarity which is absolutely necessary. If our world is going to move forward, we have to fight to make things better.
This is Alternative Radio. I'm David Barsamyan. This edition of AR features Tariq Ali on You Have to Fight Back. When faced with adversity, one can look away and do nothing. But for our own dignity and self-respect, we must fight back and resist the depredations of the state and corporate sector. Historically speaking, this is one of those critical inflection points. A lot of people are deeply concerned about the Trump regime and Elon Musk. The social safety net is being shredded while the gazillionaires make out like bandits. Tariq Ali says, what the United States needs today is an opposition which fights back politically, intellectually, and culturally with arguments and, when necessary, comes out on the streets to defend democracy, a grassroots uprising. We need activists more than ever before. Our guest today is Tariq Ali, an internationally renowned historian and activist. He was born in Lahore, Pakistan. For many years, he's been based in London, where he's an editor of New Left Review. He's the author of many books. His latest is You Can't Please All. In February, he gave the Dr. Abdul Lodi Lecture on Human Rights at the University of St. Thomas in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And now, Tariq Ali, You Have to Fight Back.
Let me start with the following quote. I think it was in 1936 or 37, that an U.S. journalist from Life magazine, who was a photographer as well, visited India and got an interview with Mahatma Gandhi, the nationalist leader of the Indian people. And the first question she asked him was, what do you think of Western civilization? And Gandhi replied in a very soft voice, it would be a good idea. And I've never forgotten that. I read it ages and ages ago. It made me smile because Gandhi was not someone who had a great sense of humor. I mean, he could be witty. But this was, I thought, a classic remark. Now, what I want to say to you, that civilizations and what they are and who they are and how they define themselves and how they're characterized by others are usually, relatively speaking, short-lived affairs. We know ancient times, the existence of Greek civilization, the existence of Roman civilization, and what they left to the world in terms of art, in terms of culture, in terms of poetry, in many other ways. But then we had a period not much talked about in the history books. And that was, I would argue, from the 9th to the 11th centuries, the domination in the Western world, not the Eastern world, the domination in the Western world of Islamic civilization, which ruled and governed and worked with in Spain and Portugal, parts of Italy, tiny parts of France, from these centuries. And it's worth stressing today that one of the periods in Jewish history where they were the least prosecuted and persecuted, was in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, under Arab rule. And they have written about it. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam flourished together. The ruling class of that world, the European world of Islam, was an Islamic ruling class, an Arab, to be more precise, ruling class. And they debated, they discussed, they argued with each other. And apart from when the Catholic war against the Muslims began, and the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal in 1492. The Muslims were expelled from Spain in 1526. The choice they were given was either you convert to Christianity, or you die, or you leave the country. And even the King of Spain later on said, how could they be asked to leave? They were Spaniards like us, after all. But they were asked to leave. And many died. This is a history that has not often, and rarely now, been taught in the histories of the Western world. And yet it's a history that goes very deep in mathematics, in algebra, in astronomy, in medicine. All these disciplines were moved forward during the years, decades, centuries of Islamic civilization. And we wouldn't have many of the Greek texts today that we do extant if they had not been translated from ancient Greek into Arabic. Many of them disappeared afterwards. And so that civilization played its part in creating the synthesis that became Western civilization till the advent of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the thing I want to sort of stress is that the early ideologues of what was international law, since international law plays a big part in forming a civilization for good or for bad, that in these cases, most of the ideologues, historians, and philosophers, not all, but most, justified their rule, their conquests, the colonial offensive they waged, by claiming that they were a superior civilization. And they argued the point. And they were quite open about it. I mean, the Spanish philosopher Francisco de Vitoria justified the conquest of South America not in terms of the Pope or God's laws or religion. He said no. He said the native peoples of South America had violated the law of communication. What was the law of communication? The freedom to travel freely across the continent and the freedom to trade. I.e., all the things that the natives people were stopping the Spanish conquerors from doing in their continent, taking it over, imposing through force their right to trade, their right to kill, their right to occupy. This was described as the law of communication. I mean, one could use that same argument and say people today who get so worked up about migrants traveling all over the world, seeking jobs in places where they think they can find them, that law of communication is being violated by every single government in the West in one way or another. And most recently by Donald Trump's decision to deport migrants from South America back to the places from where they came. Very dangerous development. And, the people being expelled could very much use the law of communication, saying he's stopping our right to trade and travel. But that was the argument used to defend the entire conquest of South America by the Spanish. The Puritans who took the north of America, the arguments they used tended more towards religion and the use of Protestantism, though some of the more sharper ones used other language, like, the economic language, saying you're interfering with us doing what we want to do. Walter Grotius, who's the great Dutch theorist, used very similar language. He started off by defending the right of piracy, pirating on the sea. Grotius explained that the high seas should be regarded as a free zone for both states and armed private companies. Just open. And if we are stronger, the armed private companies are stronger than the state, then they must be allowed to have their way. This is something, incidentally, that can be noticed today in most parts of the Western world. How private companies, the tech billionaires are just one example, are being given more and more leeway in determining government policies, and how, as a result, politics itself is getting hollowed out, and democracy likewise. Since money controls everything, the last figures I got, I can't recall them now, but both from the States and from Britain, is that the alienation of people between the ages of 16 and 30 with the political system and how it functions is increasing. Many, many people don't vote because they say it changes nothing. And on that front, one has to say that they are right. I mean, if you look at the set of politicians competing with each other to make money, what's the big difference? And that is what they're doing. Grotius, the defender of Dutch colonialism, of Dutch brutalities on the ocean, etc., then wrote, "The right of the sword is the right to award punishment," and I quote, "Kings and those who are invested with a power equal to kings have a right to exact punishments, not only for injuries committed against themselves or their subjects, but likewise for those which do not peculiarly concern them, but are in any persons whatsoever grievous violations of the law of nature or nations." In other words, what Grotius was offering was license to attack, conquer, and kill whosoever stood in the way of European colonial expansion. And that is how it was done. So every move to explain civilization is linked to colonialism, to expansionism, to the right to do whatever they want to do to native peoples. This has happened, and it's happened because a tiny part of the tiniest continent compared to the others, Europe, got the Industrial Revolution going, got technology going, began to develop weapons which no one else could compete with. So within the European world, Britain first, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, conquered the rest of the world. That is what they did. At the same time, in another part of the world, There were other civilizations, and if you read their philosophers, even going back to the years before the Christian era, you will read some astonishing texts by Chinese philosophers, Chinese bureaucrats, Chinese political scientists before the Christian era, saying that we should try and create societies in which all are benefited, not equally, they didn't raise the question of equality, but in which the entire population is looked after and their needs fulfilled. Each of them is taught to write, and this decision to make China literate, which goes back at over 2,000 years now, is what helps to explain the continuing hold that the civilization of that part of the world holds in China itself. It is quite astonishing what was written in books, in essays, in the saying of sages, the early attacks on Confucius for being too conservative, the fights with the monarchy, and some even raising the question of why do we need a monarchy in the 4th century, in the 5th century. So that civilization, whatever, and it had shortcomings like any other civilization did, actually was a more thoughtful one in many ways compared to the civilizations which effectively wanted to take the rest of the world. The Chinese regarded China as the world. That's what they called it in early texts, the world. They referred to China as the world. And this continuity of language, of systems of thought, of literacy, have remained and created now a country that is challenging the world. I mean, any of you who've been to China recently, you compare the social infrastructure of that country with that of North America. I mean, North America abandoned trains 100 years ago. The Chinese are rebuilding a train system which compares to nothing else on earth. And they're doing it in a way where these trains are affordable for everyone, not just the wealthy or the rich. And that automatically means that because the public transport system is so good, your reliance on the motor car becomes less, which is good for everyone, especially including ecology. And so we have this strange contrast between two civilizations. Western civilization created largely in the period, of course created before as well, as I pointed out, but created in its modern form after the Industrial Revolution and the growth of technology. Now, the question for me is not whether America, the United States is in inexorable decline. It isn't. It's a decline that, it is being partially in decline, but not to the extent that people engage in wishful thinking would like it to be. Because let's take one example. The invention of the web, the internet, came from the West Coast. It didn't come from China, it didn't come from India. It came from the West Coast. And there are reasons for that as well. And that one invention transformed the world, transformed the United States, transformed all the generations who have grown up after it in a good way. It has bad sides too, which invention doesn't? But in the sense of being able to communicate with each other. I remember an Iraqi poet telling me the day Bush Jr. was bombing Baghdad and sending the American troops had gone in to capture Iraq. And I was having a meal with this Iraqi historian, and he'd written a very powerful and strong poem. And he said to me, Anitar, this poem I have written in the old days, I might have read it out on the telephone to my friend Muzaffar al-Nawab, another great poet in exile in Damascus at the time. And we would have laughed and joked, he would have criticized, I would have defended. But now this is a poem I've written today. And already it's being recited in the cafes in Basra. He said, that could never have happened before. And this small example explains what this invention has done. By and large, in my opinion, of course, it can be and will be misused by the tech billionaires and others, but they can't completely destroy it now or control it. That's the nice side of it. There are too many people from this generation and the generation before it who know how it functions and who can deal with it. We wouldn't have got much of the news that we have got, not from the mainstream media networks, but from individuals during the Gaza war, which has compelled some of the mainstream, shamed them to take up what is going on there. And that's what I want to talk about now. Because for me, the biggest breakdown in Western civilization, since one segment of that civilization, the German segment of it, carried out the Judeo-side of the Second World War. Since then, and everyone thought the world had learned its lessons, but no. Millions died in Vietnam. At least 2 million people were killed by the US in Iraq, 5 million orphans, 40 or 50,000 in Libya. We haven't got the total figures yet for the Syrian civil war, which has been going on from 2011 and has recently been ended by yet another expansion and the taking over of an Arab country. Those figures will come in yet. But most strikingly, what has shocked people, including myself, and including many, many Jewish people who do not consider themselves Zionists, leave alone supporters of the most extreme wing of Zionism led by Netanyahu. They are angry. And one of the most moving things for me was to see the Jewish students, young Jewish students in New York, occupying the Grand Central Station, saying, leave it to us, this is our duty, and raising the question of what was going on in Israel. Many, many of my Jewish friends who've been friends for, I was going to say centuries, are against this war. And yet the way it's being portrayed is completely different as a fight between Jews and non-Jews, not a fight between what is being done to the Palestinians. And we're now in a shameful situation that people in the West who have watched this genocide taking place day after day after day, who have watched Israeli soldiers of the IDF gleefully killing and targeting children. A doctor says, why is this poor kid, aged 2, got 6 bullets in the head? And someone replies to him, oh, no reason in particular, just to make sure, I guess. This is going on. And yet the world walks by, not the whole world. Many people protest. The whole world doesn't walk by because the whole world notices. I mean, in the South mainly, there've been big, huge demonstrations taking place, and in the United States. and in Britain, huge demonstrations. Now they want to stop the demonstrations. They want to deport the students taking place. Now, where are they going to deport the Americans who've been taking part in these demonstrations? Now, most of them are not sort of Arab origin. Where are they going to be sent back to Europe? It's a long time. So it's a very strange world we live in. And I will be honest with you, I fear for this world. Because if people can watch what is the Gazans in particular, but now also on the West Bank, have been suffering for over a year, what if this carries on? What if the war in Gaza, Netanyahu needs an excuse to renew it, he does renew it, and they kill more people and they take Gaza? The logic of that is for a section of the American empire to say, well, they got away with it. And if they can get away with it, we can get away with it. So when Trump first raised the question of taking Greenland and Canada, people laughed. And I said, hang on a minute, don't laugh too quickly. Greenland, there's already a US base there, and they treat it as their own. And who are the Danes going to stand up to them? An irony of ironies. The Danish are probably, after the British, the most slavish vassals of the United States. Went to Afghanistan to fight with them, went to Iraq to fight with them, praised them, support. Now they're suddenly surprised that they can be treated in the way in which the West was treating the Arab world and the African world. It can be done to them, but not to us. Well, the question has to be asked if you support it or remain passive when it was being done to other parts of the world. Why be too upset when the big chief of the American empire says he's going to do it to you? If he can take over and break Iraq into pieces, if they can do the same to Palestine at the present moment, if they can threaten other parts of the Middle East, why shouldn't they threaten parts of Europe which they feel are in their interest, like taking over Greenland? I had an exchange with a very old songwriter, socialist songwriter friend of mine in Toronto, Frank Rooney. I said, Frank, just to show your government how foolish it is, to put it at its mildest, I'm thinking of giving critical support to the American takeover of your country. I was joking, of course, but it's Trump. I mean, looked at from the point of view of the United States, Canada's no different. I mean, they're like us. They pretend they're different, but they aren't. And they do more or less as we do. And they do as we say. I mean, this didn't happen in Trudeau Sr.'s time. It certainly is happening now. So why don't we take them over? They have a problem that most Canadians, I'm assuming, won't want it, apart from the Albertans. But you can't blame the United States for thinking like that. If they think about that, other parts of the world, why should they completely not do that with the white world? That's what it boils down to.
You're listening to Tariq Ali on You Have to Fight Back. This is Independent Alternative Radio. For copies of this program, call us 1-800-444-1977 or on our website, alternativeradio.org.
So my friend Frank wrote, and he said, I knew you were joking, but no one here is going to support an Anschluss. That was the forced merger of Germany and Austria by Hitler. And I said no. But would there be a resistance? Because no one's going to resist the United States militarily. Let's take it seriously for a minute. What would happen if Trump said, I want Canada? The first thing he'd do, of course, is discuss with the rich people in this country. So Alberta is not totally irrelevant in this regard, but others too. Get them on his side, use his own tech billionaires to say, tech billionaires of the world, unite. And then some would resist. Even a weak and supine Canadian political leadership would at the very least, one hopes, insist on a referendum. And the conditions, if they are going to cave in, I'm not saying they are, but I do want to discuss it. One shouldn't avoid it, to be prepared. That if they are going to say, well, come hell or high water, we're going to take Canada, then the Canadians could, of course, lay down conditions, saying, if you're going to force us to, we can't have a civil war with you. We might go that way, though I hope no one says that, but you and I know there are people who will. And then lay down conditions, saying even if you force us to do this, the law and rule of the Canadian state in relation to individuals carrying weapons, we will not allow that to be changed. We will not allow a relatively free health service to be changed. These are gains for our people. And in fact, a more audacious Canadian leadership, or Quebecois and Canadian leadership, could say, we can encourage other US states who would like to have our model of health and gun laws to actually, why not join Canada? We could create another group of states in this part of the world. I'm saying all this to you because the world we live in, it is, I think it's unlikely, but it could happen. So you should absolutely think of it. And to conclude, I would just like to say to all of you, but especially the younger generations, do not be frightened away by politicians or any others telling you not to think what you want to think. The freedom to think, the freedom to make up your own minds, the freedom to read books that they want you to stop reading, the freedom to say what you want to say without being accused of anti-Semitism, which is grotesque in 99% of the cases. Just to stop people thinking. Don't ever accept that, because your future and the future of your children depends on your generation and the generations to follow. And you have to fight back. Fight back. Defend all your rights the way they should be defended. And understand that if done collectively, it is more powerful than if it's done by one person. You know, we fall into the trap and the habit of idealizing people who do good things, which is fine. It's not enough. Because this single concentration on a single person is actually deeply unhealthy. And so collective, collegial ways of thinking creates a solidarity which is absolutely necessary if our world is going to move forward, rather than permit the politicians and their military-industrial complexes to wipe us out. Thank you.
What systemic changes do we need to encourage a global citizenry? Is that right?
I mean, look, even before we come round to systemic changes, we have to ask ourselves, is there a single government today that believes, for instance, that it's necessary to do something about climate change. They say they do. Now they'll even stop saying it since Trump is not in favor of it, and all his groupies in Europe will go to the same line. But it's very dangerous. And one reason, I mean, you just look what's happened in California, for God's sake. My late friend and colleague on the New Left Review, Mike Davis, once said, let Malibu burn, meaning let their houses go. And he was sort of victimized and prevented from getting a job at university as a result of that. But what he was really saying is that you need planning in how you build, where you build, why you build. And that this planning, who is going to do it? And on climate change, it's impossible without a global plan. Impossible, in my opinion. So we have to argue for it, but I'm on that. I'm quite, depressed that we don't have any country in the Western world, at any rate, and even in the Eastern world, where they say, now we're progressing, you want to curb us by using this, which is, the Chinese are doing some things about it, it's absolutely true, but not enough. So on this we have to keep on agitating. And this system that we have at the moment, which is a system that completely defends every little bit of what capital does, is not going to do it. I mean, they had a chance, even within this system, after the 2008 Wall Street crash. There's a real possibility of a turn, of this is not the way we should run. This could wreck, this could divide, this could destroy our countries, and Obama didn't do it. I mean, senior Wall Street bankers said, we were called in to see the president at the White House, this is Obama, thinking that he's going to take us off, he's going to rap us on the knuckles, he's going to tell us you've been naughty and you can't do A, B, C, D, E, F ever again. Instead, he congratulates us and says, I know we've all had problems, but carry on, we must do our best. Nothing concrete came out of that. And that is what is basically so depressing about the politicians who run most of the Western world today.
Thank you. Can we go to this mic, please? What would your message be for university administrators facing the student protests?
Well, the message would be for the people who take education seriously. And not all university administrators do take education seriously. They've been given these big jobs as a result of cronyism in many cases. I mean, the woman who headed the Columbia University in New York is a sort of total Blairite, right-wing labor, does what she's told to do, no inherent, in my opinion, views that would advance or benefit education, which all students want, regardless of their political views. And I think they fell into this trap because they didn't have the guts to resist. And one reason they didn't have the guts to resist is because lots of pro-Israeli millionaires and billionaires threatened to withdraw their funds. That's one reason. It's not the only one. And that then raises the question, should education in a serious society which has some self-respect be dependent on private funding and private donations? Isn't this one thing that every single state should do for its citizens? And turn down the money which comes with conditions, as we've now seen? So I think students have to carry on resisting and saying we're not going to accept this and see how far they can go. You never know. I mean, we've won battles before. We can win some more again. And I think lots of people, citizens of the United States who have been neutral on the war are quite shocked by the things that have happened. And it's this total failure of a decaying liberal administration. Obviously in Canada, but also in the United States, the Democrats, which have created the space for a lurch to the right in American society. People saying, well, the liberals have failed us, they can't do anything, let's try the other one. They've tried Trump once, they're trying him again. It's a terrible indictment of the Democrats.
Thank you. Is the future socialism with Chinese characteristics or fascism along the lines of that being encouraged by Trump?
Well, socialism with Chinese characteristics, I wouldn't call it that, what's happening in China. I wouldn't describe it like that. I would say it's capitalism with some socialist characteristics. But, even in China, for instance, I'm very critical of their health system, where they've effectively introduced a private mechanism where the well-off can get treatment. It's not that different. It's worse than in Canada, by the way. And they have to mend that. Xi has said that we are to make changes. How far he will, I don't know. But there's no doubt that there's been enormous progress in China from the 1980s onwards, which has transformed that country. It wouldn't have happened without the revolution, which created all these people who are going this far now. But it's amazing. I don't see anything like that happening in the Western world just yet. Trump is a sort of maverick right-wing politician. To call him a fascist, take him too seriously, because the fascists are serious people. They had ideologies, they wrote books, they were very serious fascist philosophers who one disagreed with and still does, but they were very bright people. And what we're seeing in the United States, I think, in the victory of Trump, is an act of despair by American citizens. They're not voting for fascism. To hand Trump the Senate, the House, the presidency, and he'd already got the judges swimming around in his copious pockets, that he's the most powerful president in recent years. And I don't want to give the credit for that to fascism, because he isn't that. And that the American political system itself is in deep crisis, and whether it can get itself out of that depends a lot on what the two political parties. If you look at it seriously, lots more continuities between Biden and Trump, and even Trump and Obama, than people want to give credit for, because Trump creates a spectacle around himself, which the others at least spared us that, though Biden came close to it. But so that's the situation. Especially in bad times, it's wrong to see we have to remain hopeful, don't get me wrong. But we should never pretend that things are better than they are, because that deceives us ourselves. We have to fight to make things better. No one else is going to do it for us. That's what you've got to understand.
How do you think the Western world is going to handle the rise of China?
Look, let's first see what is happening in China, what China has become. China has become the industrial workshop of the world, what Britain was in the 19th and 20th centuries. The amazing rise of Chinese capitalism, albeit under the control of the Chinese Communist Party, has made it a very strong player. Its economy, despite those who want to disparage it, is, according to the terms used for these things in relation to other countries, doing extremely well. So the US has two choices: either to accept and coexist and compete, which is what you're all taught at schools. The system is about competition. Well, compete with China. Don't slander it. Don't say it's doing things which it isn't, and don't threaten it militarily. The Chinese have only had one war in the last God knows how many years. How many has the United States fought since 9/11? The Chinese, from their point of view, they're playing the game pretty well. They are popular in many parts of the world. When they go into African countries, they build social infrastructures. They do things which giving aid can't compete with, because they also build industry in these countries. That is why the United States has got into a tizzy about all this. What if they overtake us? Well, quite honestly, if they overtake you, a lot of the world would sit up and clap its hands saying, thank God someone's done it, without fighting a war, without using nuclear weapons. Because if there's a war fought against China, whether the excuse is Taiwan or something else, well, it's not going to be restricted to that part of the world. The Chinese have been concentrating on building a self-defense military industry. They will defend their borders and the periphery of these borders, but they have also got the nuclear weaponry necessary to target the United States and Europe if they wish to. Or why provoke a war which could be a disastrous nuclear conflict? No one goes out thinking wars are going to develop into bigger conflicts, because they don't know, but they do when they can develop in that fashion. You know, small things, or things that seem small, can trigger off a bigger development. So the choice facing the United States and its Western allies is, are we going to do a deal with China in which we don't threaten to sanction it, in which we don't interfere with its trade, in which we basically strike a deal with it or not? That's the question. It's not a problem for the Chinese. They'll defend themselves. It is a problem for the United States. It's as if they had learnt no lessons at all from history of how the First World War happened, of why millions died in the First World War. So let's hope that, I mean, this is not something actually which is against US or Western interests. I mean, it's basically common sense. And a lot of American writers and philosophers and historians are actually saying this now and publishing books that are saying it is control yourselves. Don't go over the top as far as China is concerned. And here, if the Europeans had an ounce of independence, they should be doing this and saying, no, we won't go along with you, but they just follow the United States in whatever it does, as does Canada. And so that is not the act. I've always said that good friends should always tell the truth to other good friends, even if the friends don't like it. And this is how Europe and Canada should behave towards the United States. No, you're wrong. Okay, you can abuse us, call us what you like. We think you're wrong, and this is why the world would be a far better place if that happened.
Given the growing disparity between the rich and the poor in America, and given how much of the current Trump administration are members of that rich elite, do you believe that there could be any future justifications for assertions of power or force over the American people by its government or over America's allies that would be similar to the feudal divine right of kings? Do you draw any similarities there or any relationship?
This is my view, that the Trump government, my main characterization of it is that it's quite a stupid government. I say this quite seriously because I can't think of a single person who Trump has put in his cabinet who is capable thinking strategically of what the United States needs. And this was never the case, either in the Republican Party or the Democrats some decades ago. They had people. You didn't have to agree with everything they said, but you knew that they were thinking. Now you don't get that feeling. You know, everything becomes a joke or an attack on someone, and that's the same. I mean, the way Biden behaved, he basically, in my opinion, won Trump that election. We should see it like that. Otherwise, you can't explain his victory. What did Biden do? A, he hid the fact of how seriously ill he was when the whole world saw it in press conferences. Why hide it, for God's sake? It's not your fault. These things happen. You're getting old. But insisting on staying in power rather than permitting a free convention at a later stage to elect a new candidate. I think it was Biden's behavior and then the imposition of Kamala Harris, who thought by calling Trump a fascist or making jokes about him was the way forward. And that clearly is not what the American citizenry wanted. There again, they had a choice to call an open Democratic convention and allow a debate to take place and choose a candidate who they thought would be able to defeat Trump. They were so cocky, so arrogant, that they thought they would get away with it. And so were most of their supporters elsewhere in the globe, thinking that's it. You know, you have the comic side of Labour politicians in Britain who thought the Democrats were going to win and said horrific things from their point of view about Trump. Now they're apologizing. This is the level of things in global politics, and we don't help the Democrats or anyone to the left of the Republicans even marginally by covering up what they did and totally ignoring their role in power. 3 opinion polls have now said that it was Biden's unremitting, relentless support of Israel that drove many Democrats away from him, especially amongst the young. And that the cause, they're saying, if wherever the Democrat leaders go, tell them Gaza lost you that war because of the way you defended it and what you did and carried on arming the genocide. We should talk about that too. Otherwise, the thing becomes sort of unbalanced, really. Trump, 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 Trump. So that style of thinking won't get us too far.
You were just listening to Tariq Ali on You Have to Fight Back. He spoke in February at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Tariq Ali is an internationally renowned historian and activist. This program is produced by Alternative Radio. We're an independent nonprofit in our 39th year. We're supported solely by individuals just like you. We feature such voices as Norman Finkelstein, Rami Khoury, and Francesca Albanese. For copies of today's program, Tariq Ali on You Have to Fight Back, and for Noam Chomsky's classic book, The Essential Chomsky, call us 1-800-444-1977. That's 1-800-444-1977. Or you can order online our website, alternativeradio.org. That's alternativeradio.org. Printed transcripts, PDFs, and MP3s of this program are free of charge. Just call us 1-800-444-1977. Special thanks to the Atlantic Human Rights Center at St. Thomas University and to Tim Butler for technical assistance. Joe Ritchie is our general manager and editor. I'm David Barsamian. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to WMNF Tampa.